So at some point, there was the time when I and you, our writers who are listening, thought, I'd love to be able to share this story, this joy of words, with somebody else, with a whole lot of people. I'd love it to go into the world and fly as far as it can because it brought me such joy. And so as you complete the project, as you work on the project, and then as I completed the project, I kept the promise to myself to complete it and then find a publisher that was thrilled about taking it on and take on the work of getting it out into the world so that it does have other eyes on it and other people can, I hope, enjoy it. And writing is the art. Publishing is an art of sorts. Publishing is a business. So also giving yourself permission, giving myself permission to treasure the joy of writing, the art of writing, and know that the world of the marketing, I can have some influence on it. I can do as much as I possibly can. But that ultimately, the promise I kept to myself was the promise to show up every morning in my office to do the writing magic. And that's a promise that I'm happy to have kept to myself and kept for myself, and then it goes out into the world. So it's both. There is no failure because you've kept the promises to yourself in following your own impulse to create this very complex art. Writing and telling stories is one of those deep complexities of human nature. And here you are, writers who are listening, and here I am, fortunate to have a book out in the world. So I'm very grateful.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have an author on, back from walking her dog, and she's here to talk about her book and her journey as an author and all great things about being an author. You're going to learn a lot from my guest today. Lynne is on the podcast, and we have a great book to talk about, lots of things to discuss, and you're going to have a great time listening to Lynne. Lynne, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. So glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. I already know the answer to this question, but my audience does not know. Lynne, where are you joining us today for the podcast?
I am joining the podcast from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, which is in the Milwaukee area. And I'm about a block and a half from Lake Michigan. Really
close to the lake. That's amazing. Awesome. Your journey as an author, Lynne, how did all this start for you? There had to be a time where being an author wasn't really a consideration, maybe. And now here you are to talk about your book. So something's happened. I would love to know what happened to get you to this point. When did becoming an author become a thing for you?
Well, like so many of us who write, and I know there are a lot of writers listening, there's some moment when you're so excited about what you're reading that you begin to think, this would be the thing I would love to do if I had my choice of all the things in the world to do. And so I was an early and voracious reader, like so many of us are. I was surrounded by books as a child. My mother was a reader and an English major, and she wrote a little bit. My father wrote a little bit. And so we were always surrounded by books. And the best thing in the world to get as a Christmas present was a book. And I dove into the world of books and reading and the magic of reading. And at some point, I began to write stories. I think my earliest self-illustrated book was The Loneliest Christmas Tree, with sort of a wonky-looking Christmas tree done in full-color crayon. And I must have been about 6 or 7. And I went on to become a complete geek. And my undergraduate degree was in English literature and writing. And back then, there wasn't a creative writing track at the University of Illinois. It was called rhetoric. And then I went on to do a master's in creative writing literature at Hopkins, Johns Hopkins. And along the way, my my sort of fiction adjacent worlds were writing and editing in the world of museums and institutions. And I always wanted to be a writer. I did writing and editing of nonfiction and museum and fine arts And I always hoped at some point, starting probably in my 20s, seriously, to be able to write fiction, write books and stories.
It's amazing. When we chatted originally, you mentioned something around my mother was my first librarian, and that stuck with me. How else did she model like authorship and reading and the love for books? What other things she did besides having so many books in your home?
You can see that
Yeah.
my influence. In fact, over, I think it's on that shelf right there, are some of my mother's collected tiny books. She loved little books. So my mother was my first librarian because we were so surrounded by books, because she and my father had a house full of books. And I was very lucky because the very best thing a person could do with their free time was to read. And she loved authors. I remember when she would select books for us when we were little, she would be so excited about them. And she would talk about the authors because she had looked into them. And she had always wanted to be a writer. So there was that little thread in her life. And she wrote in a local newsletter. She wrote Irma Bombeck-like contributions to newsletters and local tiny little newspapers. And so there was always a reverence for writing. And when I began to try and figure out what in the world I wanted to do with myself, she was excited about the idea of writing, and she encouraged me, even though we both knew that there was unlikely to be like a paycheck at the end of that reliably. So she was very encouraging. And one of the books that she gave me was a beautifully bound book, which was collected quotations from various writers called The Joy of Writing. And I have that with me somewhere still back there in one of these bookshelves. Don't ask me to find it now.
It's amazing the influence our parents can have on us as a child, and how that influence can shape us as adults, right? You carry that forward into your life today, and your love for books. You can see the root of that in your parents. I'm curious for young parents who may be listening, who may not be an author, but they want their children to grow up in a home that's like that, where there's an appreciation and a love for books. What kind of advice can you give to a young parent around just why read? Why is that so important, though?
Yeah, I believe, my mother was my first librarian. She was my first storyteller. She read to me when I was little. We read every night when we were little. She would read us a chapter before going to bed. She was truly extraordinary. She was also a wonderfully gifted pianist. So she would read a chapter to us, and then she would go down to the piano, I kid you not, and play lullabies. And so we had this great gift from her of an appreciation for art, for music, for books. And to young parents or parents of any age or grandparents, read to your children and give them permission to fall in love with you into the story. The excitement and enthusiasm that you feel, you don't have to make it fake. There's just a joy in reading books at any age. The early readers are charming and are meant to draw children in from page to page to page. And chapter books can be times of closeness and times to connect, even if it's just a few pages you read together. And they learn by osmosis, the osmosis of the heart, the osmosis of the enthusiasm that you display toward the book that you're reading or the story that you're reading to them. They know immediately, without having to say the sentence, I love reading, or books are important, but rather, here we are doing this, living this, being with these amazing stories, and they will open up worlds. They open up the possibilities of other books, of other lands, of other stories, of other journeys. And so I believe that books are the first portal magic, and you can introduce them to your children in ways that connect you in deeply moving ways that can sometimes get you through some of the bouncy, tough teenage years as well. Yeah. They will always be grateful.
Yeah. And I think that does set a foundation for your kids as they grow older to love and appreciate books and reading, and helps with their verbal skills and everything. Right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It helps cognitively. It helps with their verbal skills. It helps them to understand. And just because as they're reading, as you're reading, we form pictures in our minds. We see the stories. And so we see characters doing things that characters are doing. So we learn from the books about the possibilities of being together as people and being together as friends and being together as a family, even if our families are non-traditional or kind of a little wonky. So we get to look at new ways of doing things and comforting ways of doing things. And I believe that reading to your children is one of those great fundamentals in life.
So, Lynne, let's talk about your book, Journey to Everland Bay. I would love to kind of get into how this book came to be. What was the origin? What was the seed that sparked the writing of this book? And then let's get into a little bit more about what we're going to find as readers. But take us through the origin story of Journey to Everland Bay.
I will do that. I had begun writing seriously many years ago and had put together, eventually for my master's in creative writing fiction at Hopkins, a collection of short stories, which was my capstone project. I'd been chipping away at writing for all of my life, really bad poetry in my high school years. And then I had published one of those stories and then another one. And they were literary fiction. And I was interested in working on a longer project. I couldn't get my legs under me for a longer project in literary fiction, in the traditional literary fiction. And I was noticing that I also loved the great imaginative works of fantasy, contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy. And I gave myself permission to begin exploring the possibilities of writing in this genre and looking at the freedom of writing in this genre. So I did a messy first draft that I completed in 2014. And I used for that messy first draft, I needed kind of a diving board to get myself into it and to hold myself accountable. So I used the structure of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. I did it in July. It's normally in November, but I used their structure to hold myself accountable. And then life got in the way. So I finished my first horrible draft, and that was 2014. And I moved, and I had medical dramas, and I had, people they die, they have complications, all kinds of things that happened. And I wasn't able to get back to it until 2020, when a friend of mine encouraged me, because she had a similar story. She had written an outline and then a draft, and it was messy. She was ready to toss hers. Patricia Skalka, who's a wonderful thriller writer, by the way. And she decided to take a look through her manuscript one more time before giving it a toss. And she thought, there may be something here. And here she is now, 7 or 8 books into a fabulous series. And I thought, well, maybe if she can do it, I can do it. And I began looking at it. I got involved with a local writing studio here in the Wisconsin area called All Writers Workshop. And that gave me deadlines. And then the world shut down with COVID. And that I gave myself permission to use that time and see if there was something worth pursuing. And so by the end of, I revised it and revised it and revised it and revised it. It truly was a mess. I had to pick it apart, put it all back together, give up on the first one, start halfway through the book and revise. It was totally messy. And that gave me hope and encouragement and the will to move forward and get it into completion. So that was my journey. And then began the querying process and so forth.
Yeah. So for the reader, Lynn, what is your big hope? What can we find as a reader? Who is this book for? What are we going to find when we open this cover for the first time?
Well, I will show the book because I do believe it's a beautiful book.
It is gorgeous.
Journey to Everland Bay is about young mage in training, Gemma Avalon, who is catapulted from her life in the museum world of Washington, D.C. to rescue her ancestral homeland from powerful dark arts mages who threaten everything important to her. And along the way, she discovers her truest strengths and her deepest sense of self. It is a journey of magic and enchantment. It uses the construct of contemporary fantasy, or really, it really borrows from the Celtic otherworld tradition. So this is a world that exists simultaneously with our own. If you went out the door and maybe into a beautiful park, you might find Everland Bay in your own backyard. And it borrows on the notion that really there is the potential for enchantment and magic in our own lives. And that everyday magic, the magic of a smile, the magic of a friendship, the magic of staying in connection, the magic of being true to each other is the biggest magic of all. And so in this book, there is a focus on strengths, the strength of friendship, the strength of family, even found family, because so often in this world, we don't have the gift of living close by to our families, but there is found family. There is looking at a beautiful world and seeing even in the difficulties in our lives, there's maybe a beautiful flower, or in this world, there's also flying pegasi the size of walnuts. There are griffins, there are dragons, there are wonderful magical creatures. But at the heart of it all is friendship and the love of our everyday world, and wanting what we have and creating a better world. So I think the book is for readers who love to step into a book and enter a different world and love the possibility of things getting better. It is a hopeful book. The notion isn't that it is a perfect world, so it's not a utopia, but it's what's called a protopia, a world in which we're working together for the good.
Okay, I love that. And when I look at the cover, I see in the bottom corner, book 1. So that means there are more to come.
There are more to come. In fact, I am working on the second book now. I am busy working and revising that one.
So that's the name of my podcast, is Living the Next Chapter. And you're doing that by writing the next book, right? So it all ties together.
Indeed. And we are talking a little bit before the show about advice to writers, not really advice, but encouragement to writers as the process goes on and it's time to do the steps of querying and all the things that we do. Once the book is out, being looked at, I was encouraged. So I'll share my own experience, strength and hope with you, the writer. Just get back in and write whatever's next. I also write short stories and I write poetry. Sometimes those are sort of palate cleansers in a way. It gives me something short to do. And my poetry sometimes is natural world poetry. Sometimes it deals with some really deep trauma. And so it gives me a different way to look at the world and look at my writing. And then now, as I say, I'm working very assiduously on book 2. So just keep going, because for me anyway, if I don't stay accountable to my writing, it can just go back into the manuscript box and sit there for another 10 years.
So I'm on your website while we're chatting, Lynn, and I clicked through to buy the book, clicked your link, and it took me to Black Rose Writing. Can you tell me more about Black Rose Writing?
Black Rose Writing is a small, independent press. They are a traditional publisher, and they are based in Texas. They're wonderful. They produce many different books, from literary to memoir to thrillers to fantasy and science fiction, mysteries. They're a very good medium-sized small press. So they work very hard with their authors to make sure the covers are beautiful and the interiors are nicely designed. And they work hard on what I call the back end. So I don't have to, they get it out into the world. That's the beauty of traditional publishing. That's their job. My job is to be there at book signings and to do the best work I can on my manuscript, and also to be out there in social media. But they do just a ton of things from the back side of things to get the book in the sight line of various readers, potential readers, and any who would like to purchase the book.
I clicked on their Meet the Team link on their website.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a great group of people. Was there someone that you work specifically with that you'd like to thank as part of your journey as an author?
Well, I'd love to thank Reagan Rothy, who took a chance on this book from a completely unknown author. Mm-hmm. And my book went into the query form. It feels like it's going into the void of all voids. And within one day, they responded with a request for the full manuscript. And then 2 weeks after that, he responded with a contract offer. So it was an exciting moment. But they're all good. Minna is wonderful, and David is the designer, and they care so much about their authors and about the book. And in fact, they are so interested in meeting their writers in person, their authors in person, that they do a Black Rose writing retreat once a year. This will be the first year I'll be able to join, and I'm really excited about that. I'm looking forward to meeting them all in person. So that will be this September. And I get to meet my other author buddies, my colleagues, and ask them how it's going. And there are a number of authors that have been with Black Rose for many, many years and many, many titles. So I'll get to ask all my newbie questions, and I'm really looking forward to that.
It's great when you can have a community to support you. Black Rose, having their team helping you, but then again, the other authors as well. It's kind of nice. You don't feel like you're so alone as an author, right?
It's really true. And they provide a website, or rather a Facebook page, a private group for their authors. And we are active in that. We chat back and forth. We post little pictures from our book signings and cheer each other on, and we ask questions. And it's like having your own writing team and author team there. Sometimes I'm too shy to ask the really dumb questions, but one day I'll get brave enough to ask all of them. Maybe this September at the retreat. But it's just such a warm and inviting community, and it's clear that those of us who at least do participate in that, it's not about competition. It's about encouraging each other and about really cheering each other on, because this is hard work, this business of writing and publishing. So I'm very grateful.
Sounds like that
opportunity.
Sounds like a great team. And I love they even have their own podcast, the Black Rose Writing Podcast, mm-hmm. which is kind of nice that they do that as well. That's great. So I love that it's hosted by the team right from Black Rose.
Yes. Yeah, it really is nice. Excellent. They really work hard on the work that they're putting out there in the world. So I appreciate them.
Yeah, it's good. Well, we've given them lots of praise and love. And hopefully they'll hear that and be like, wow, this is great that Lynne gave us so beautiful comments and thoughts. That's great. Let's talk again then, Lynne, to the new authors that are listening. I really want to encourage a young author. You seem to be very plugged in, and your desire seems to encourage others in the space to do the thing, write the book, share your story. I would just love to get your knowledge and wisdom for a young author who's maybe struggling in the early days of writing. Maybe they haven't grown up in a home where their mother was their librarian, and this is all new to them. What could you do to inspire and encourage them on their journey as an author? Do you have some words of wisdom for us that we can share with a young author?
Absolutely. And what a great question. And to anyone listening out there, to young authors, and I will also say to people who are writing at any age, because sometimes we are young in our experience, but have more years under our belt. And life doesn't always get very linear, where all of a sudden at 20, we're doing the thing we want to do with the rest of our life. So I'll just say to new authors of any age, give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to say yes to your writing. That sounds really, really corny, but give yourself permission to schedule time. What I did was block out time in blocks on my electronic calendar as if I was making an appointment with myself. I still have it. I have hours blocked on my calendar. And even if you're working full time at a different work, block out 15 minutes, block out an hour, block out whatever you can so that you are important in your calendar. And I also would suggest, I know it was really important for me to read everything you can. I know you've heard this a bazillion times, but reading is what shapes me most as a writer. And turn off television. Read, go back to those books and read as deeply as you can. And find yourself within a community, because although I did have the great gift of a mother who loved to read and books like this on the shelves, we had a very troubled family life. So things got very fractured after a number of years, and life got difficult and challenging. And so books were my retreat. I used to read up in an apple tree. I used to take books with me up into an apple tree and read as much as I could. And then as I was pursuing it as an adult and I was working full time, I would carve out little bits of time to do my assignments when I was working on my degrees in writing, and then to work on whatever the stories were or the poetry. And keep on giving yourself permission to say to yourself that you're worth it. Your work is worth it. I would also say get involved in writing communities. There are writing associations in your area. Here in Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Writers Association, which is wonderful, just wonderful. People are so excited about encouraging writers, and there are writing conferences. There's the Lake Fly Conference. There's the Writing Association Conference up in, I think, La Crosse this fall. And in your area, there will be writing conferences, writing festivals, literary festivals. Meet your people. And even if you feel like, I can't go there because I'm just a newbie, I've never written a thing in my life, give yourself permission to go anyway, because everybody was there once. I go to the Chicago Writers Association. I'm a member there as well, which is about an hour and a half south of me. They do a once a year writing workshop retreat thing called Let's Just Write. And it's just fabulous. And everybody from people who have never published a thing to people who have published way too many things are there, along with these massive experts. And people are, once again, so generous spirited, generous hearted. And so by being a part of a community like that, I know for me, I can feel part of things and feel like I belong, and that this is okay to do. So give yourself permission. I know I've said that 100 times, but I can't say it enough. And if you can find yourself a group of writers, like I do have All Writers Workshop here, they're great. They're regional, but they're also international. So because of the pivot toward online, there are many places like All Writers. I'm fond of them, but there are many that you can plug into and take a class, take a workshop, hold yourself accountable to get your poetry or short stories or your novel started or even completed. Maybe you have one moldering in a box for the last decade, like I did. So it's important, and your words are important, and your stories are important. Because if it's there and stirring within you, it means it probably has a reason to be out in the world.
Yeah.
And you're probably the one to tell it. So if you're looking for a sign, this is it.
That's it. You just heard it from Lynne. Not only start, but then also keep going, right? Keep writing, keep moving forward. Even on those days when the inspirations might not be there. I love the fact that you have those in your calendar to kind of, it's like a dentist appointment. You're going to be there because it's in your calendar.
It's like a dentist appointment. And now, because of the shifts in my own schedule, it is what I do for my work in the world. And so I have office hours. I keep them. those are the times I am in the office. This is my office, and I am working on whatever it is. And I write in my mornings into the early afternoon, and I do marketing later. So I give my best hours to my writing. And even if you're just able to write a couple of paragraphs, that counts. It all counts because you're keeping promises to yourself and you matter. And so don't be discouraged about it, how horrible it is. At least it helped me. It helped me too. Everybody's different about the way they do it. I know you're probably different in the way you do your writing, but I write and keep going. I do not edit while I'm writing. I write and keep going. Because if I looked at what I was doing in my first drafts as I'm doing what I call first pages, it's really messy and discouraging. So I just keep going. I want to get to the end of the story, end of the novel, end of the short story, end of the poem. And then I begin revisions. So for me, it's helpful to be very goal-oriented, to complete and then revise, complete and then revise.
Lynne, I mentioned your website is beautiful, and I'd like to send people there, and I have one last question for you at the end. But as far as where we go on your website and where you would like us to go, we'll have links in the show notes, as always, so people can click and go right there. But where are you most active online, maybe social media-wise? And tell us about your website.
Okay. My website is lynneshaner.com, LYNNESHANER.com. You'll see a clean first page with a little book trailer, which is fun. And then below that, there's information about the book. There are, of course, buttons to click on so that you can buy that book. And then you'll see headings for events where I'm going to be showing up. And in some of those, there'll be links to appearances that I've already had. There are links to resources. There are lots of things. I like to provide lots of things. There's a newsletter that I encourage you to sign up for. And it's a little treat that you get when you do sign up. And I write those only once a month, I promise. So I don't inundate your email inboxes. And I'm also active on Threads. And that handle is Lynne.Shaner. And the former Twitter, the Twitter is LShaner_author. I am not as active on that, but I'm still somewhat active on that. And then I do have Facebook, author Lynne Shaner. So I'm pretty easy to find. My name is unusual enough that I'm pretty Googleable. So pretty easy to search.
Okay, so I want you to imagine now, Lynne, climbing back up into that apple tree for a second that you talked about. One of my favorite quotes has to do with an apple. And it's all around the idea of having influence and being able to connect with somebody. As a young author, as a new author, it's like, who really cares what I have to write about? Who's going to connect with me as an author? You know, I only sold one book, when I first launched, and I'm like, that seems like a failure. But I want to challenge that thought that even just one person buying your book is considered a failure, and I'm using air quotes. In that, this quote around an apple, I think, really gives a different perspective. So if you climb back up in the apple tree and you reach up and grab an apple and you're able to cut it open, you see the seeds inside of an apple, right? So you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed. Correct? There is unlimited potential in one seed, and it's immeasurable. How many apples can come from one seed over the lifetime of an apple tree? You can't count that number. So even though you sell one book to one person and you think, I wanted to sell it to 100,000 people. Obviously we want that. That's success. That's great. That's wonderful. That's a lot of people we've reached. But when we sell it to one person and we're like, it didn't meet my expectations, Lynne. I really wanted to do more and have a bigger audience. What if that one seed had an impact on someone's life and their life is different? And then they treated their family different, or they showed up in the world different because of the words you wrote in your book. You had the power to influence them to a better life. right? Just because you put a book out. So instead of looking at a small amount of sales as being a quote failure, it's actually there's unlimited potential for your words to help people. So with that context, to you, how do you measure success as an author? What makes you go, yes, I met the goal for this book. This is what I have in mind as far as my reach or my audience. How do you measure success as an author?
Those are such good questions, and there's so many of them. I can still picture that apple tree that I used to climb up into and read in. And writing books, writing stories, and all of the writers will hear this, and all of the readers will hear this too. It's really about keeping promises to ourselves. So at some point, there was the time when I and you, our writers who are listening, thought, I'd love to be able to share this story, this joy of words with somebody else, with a whole lot of people. I'd love it to go into the world and fly as far as it can because it brought me such joy. And so as you complete the project, as you work on the project, and then as I completed the project, I kept the promise to myself to complete it and then find a publisher that was thrilled about taking it on and take on the work of getting it out into the world so that it does have other eyes on it and other people can, I hope, enjoy it. And writing is the art. Publishing is an art of sorts. Publishing is a business. So also giving yourself permission, giving myself permission to treasure the joy of writing, the art of writing, and know that the world of the marketing, I can have some influence on it. I can do as much as I possibly can. But that ultimately, the promise I kept to myself was the promise to show up every morning in my office to do the writing magic. And that's a promise that I'm happy to have kept to myself and kept for myself. And then it goes out into the world. So it's both. There is no failure because you've kept the promises to yourself in following your own impulse to create this very complex art. Writing and telling stories is one of those deep complexities of human nature. And here you are, writers who are listening, and here I am, fortunate to have a book out in the world. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, and for the young author, the new author listening, there are thousands and thousands of books in the world, but the only person who can write your book is you. You're the only one. That's right. No one else can write your book. So
absolutely,
if you don't write it, it'll never exist. So
it'll never be out there.
Get out there, climb up in that apple tree.
Climb up in that apple tree and read everything you can, and then get back to your keyboard and write everything you can. And it's worth it. I'm here to tell you that it's worth it. And mine was a longer journey. I am not a young writer, but I always wanted to do it. And I'm grateful that I saw it through to the end. And now, of course, as these things are, it's an end, but it's a beginning, because for the rest of my life, I will be living a literary life. And that's a life of joy and connection. And I'm very grateful.
And I love too, Lynne, that you have the opportunity now as an author, a published author, to take that same book, put it right next to the books that your mother cherished, and now you can add to her library in honor of her being your first librarian. You get to put your book next to her favorite books. So that's a nice thing to think about as well.
It is indeed. I'm very, very fortunate to be able to do that. She would be thrilled if unfortunately, she passed away many years ago, but she would be thrilled. And if you're listening, Mom, she probably inspired the book as far as, for all I know,
Mm-hmm. Lynne, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story with us, your journey. You're very inspiring to talk to. And I think that we've all learned something great from having you on the podcast. Keep us in mind, because I'm sure there's more coming. And as book 2 comes out and beyond, I would love to have you back to catch up with you, celebrate the next book as it comes out. Just keep us in mind, because we'd love to hear from you again on the podcast.
would be my great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, everyone. All the information, as always, in the show notes. Please reach out to Lynne as well. Go check out all the great people at Black Rose Writing. They sound like an amazing team. And we'll have a link to their podcast as well here, so you can go listen to their show and hear about that as well. Lynne, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.